Welcome to PORA. I'm your host, David Russell, and no co-host because I gave him the night off for this because, I have this really cool guest that's coming on, and we are kind of the same when it comes to the topic tonight, which is church history. So without further ado, I am here with Jeremiah, otherwise known as the Black Doctor 21 on TikTok. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. How about you, man?
Good, man. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and, why you love church history and what you do and so forth. Why the Black Doctor 21, all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's a lot to go with. For those who know me and those who don't, my name is Jeremiah. I am a budding apologist, seminarian. I go to Beeson Divinity School up in Birmingham, Alabama. I am also a Presbyterian. I serve as the pastoral intern and the interim youth director for my church. And as I said before, I'm a budding apologist. I love the concept of defending the faith. I've been doing that. I've been engaging in that practice for about 7 years now, and it's been an amazing experience. So my love for church history, where does that come from? It really comes from not only just interacting with our Roman Catholic friends and saying, if you call yourself a Christian, and if you say that you belong in the church, where does your church come from? Can you establish your heritage from the first century? And that causes you to realize something, that we as Christians, we belong in a family. Our church history as Protestants, we don't start with Billy Graham. We go to the very beginning of what Christ has done. Christ has been building his church for the past 2,000 years. We have a family, a family tree that expands through thousands of years. The reasons that we believe what we believe can be traced throughout history. So what we know matters and what we believe matters. And it really helps in relation to just apologetics. We're the reason why we learn church history is to tackle some of the stuff that we're going to learn today, both Greek and church history. So I think that as you guys listen to this, let this discussion build a love for the people who have gone before us and the things that they've said, to help you understand what you believe, why you believe it, and why it matters today.
Awesome, man. I love the passion in your voice when you talk about it. And so yeah, you're also part of another podcast too, right?
Yes, I am I'm basically the fourth, but we're part of a four-man team called the Men of the Way podcast, with my friend Buck Rogers, or Noel. Andrew does Apologetics, Andrew Disciple, which is my friend Blake, and myself. We stream every Saturday at around 7 o'clock Central Time, taking on different topics. And really, I guess this week is going through a theme of church history, because we're going through the subject of suffering for the faith and martyrdom throughout church history.
Nice. And it's crazy. Just a little snippet on that. I mean, Christians have always kept a kind of a log of the martyrs, to not just to record the historical aspect, but to give encouragement for those that were yet to be tested and those that needed remembering. So they wanted to have it not only memorize, for their memory, but to show the people that were yet to be tested, that, this is stand fast, because this
Right.
happens, and it would give encouragement, so like, I think Polycarp's was pretty deep. But before we get into that, yeah, church history, guys, I've always said, this is your family legacy, right? Church history is your family legacy, and it's a part of who we are. We need to know where we've come from to know where we're going. We need to learn church history, for the simple fact is we need to see what those early church fathers had to say about a lot of things. And you'll find a lot more confirmation than you will disagreement. At times you'll find disagreement, but it's your legacy. It's your right. It's your heritage you need to know about.
Right.
And I can't think of a more exciting legacy to think about than the ones that have come before us, the ones that were martyred, the ones that were suffering in various degrees, the ones that had to flee the city, and take refuge in different areas, and then come back and have tremendous stories about healings and I don't know, just several different things, controversies, and we see that unity doesn't equal uniformity, and they gave up certain things to keep unity. One comes to mind is Polycarp again, where they are having a battle over Easter,
The
right?
Quarto-Deciman controversy.
Yes, they're having this battle, and it wasn't so much a battle as it was, okay, let's iron this out. Polycarp goes to Rome, meets with and I can't remember his name right now. It just slipped my mind.
This is just the Bishop of Rome at the time.
Yes, the Bishop of Rome. He did have a specific name. It did start with an A, but here's the thing. They start arguing about it. They say, we're not going to persuade you. I'm not going to persuade you. Polycarp was, let's celebrate with the focus on the crucifixion and then do a Eucharist on Sunday, but celebrate Saturday. And the Bishop of Rome was like, no, let's celebrate the resurrection on Sunday. And Polycarp's, well, hey, I got John that backs me up here,
It's like we have the tradition of the apostles.
Yeah, and the Bishop of Rome was like, well, that's well and good, but I got freedom, and also Peter and Paul started everything up here.
So this is what we did when Peter and Paul came up here. So
right, yeah,
we didn't see a problem with it.
Yeah, so what did they do at the end? Polycarp basically realizes, okay, you know what? We can have unity and not uniformity. And they took the Lord's Supper together as a symbolism of their unity and still celebrated their own tradition. So this is a legacy, and it's so cool that you can be a part of, that you can learn. And I'm on my 6th church history set of classes and lectures, right?
Wow.
You can't just take just one. I've told this to several people. Hey, look, when you get a certain teacher, they're going to tell you a couple things, and they're going to leave out some things because you got to always leave stuff on the cutting room floor. And that's not even, and that's minus the reading. The lectures are good because they highlight a lot of things, but it's minus the reading. You always have to read each and every church father, each and every church historian. You're gonna have to look in the sociocultural context. You're gonna have to look into all that stuff, and it blows me away every time. And the more deeper I even get into it, so yeah, man, that's just my excitement with it, man. And I wanted to bring you on specifically, Jeremiah, because we have this thing, and I know you've seen it on TikTok. You've seen it on YouTube. You've seen it across the board that Christianity really began and was defined at the Council of Nicea. And Nicea was just this political ploy that was gearing Christianity up. And most people think Constantine was the first to initialize Christianity as the official Roman religion.
Hashtag blame Constantine.
Right. Blame Constantine, right? And that's what I want to talk about. Did Christianity really, was Nicea really a political ploy? What led up to Nicea and why did it happen? So here's the punchline. Was Nicea a political ploy by Mr. Constantine?
No. like literally every single point of that question can be responded with no. Was the Council of Nicaea a political ploy? No. Was it a ploy by Constantine? No. Was it mainly discussing politics? No. every single point of it, we can look at it and say, this doesn't fit what the actual records that we have.
Right. So, I mean, we get conspiracy theorists, though, and the Da Vinci Code made Nicea really popular here again. And next thing you know, we have stuff like the Zeitgeist that comes out, and it brings up all these old questions that have been around that we have actually battled throughout the ages, you know?
Yeah.
So what is your take here? Why do we have to fight this battle over and over again when it comes to these councils?
Well, the main reason why is because we're dealing with sinners here. And what does Romans 1 say about sinners is that men suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And also, particularly when we're dealing with Christianity, especially in the American circles and in Western circles, Christianity is not viewed in a positive light. So anything that comes against Christianity, it is taken and it is embraced and it is repeated, especially to new people. And so if you repeat a lie long enough and as many times as you can, for a lot of people who will not actually look into the sources themselves, they will perceive it as truth. Because those who love darkness hate the light and do not come to the light lest their deeds be exposed. Also, just because these people are popular, you have popular people just repeating these statements, and really in relation to like scholars like Bart Ehrman or people like Dan Brown who have highly critiqued Christianity, if they say these things, they're taken upon their popular authority. And most of these people are apostates. So anything that has any relationship that causes a negative attitude towards Christianity is embraced. And so that's why Christians, we need to know our history. We need to know what we're talking about so that when people state these claims, we can easily say, yeah, I know where that's from. This is why it's wrong.
Yeah, I was gonna to basically just back that up as far as the ignorance part. It it seems today that people don't want to learn this stuff anymore, or they
Yeah.
take it for granted. I heard one pastor talk about, you know, it's like a generational cycle, right? So like one
Mhm.
generation will believe it with their whole heart. The other one will assume it, pretty much take it for granted. Then the next generation will rebel against it, you know?
Mhm.
And then it starts back over. That rebellion will lead to people digging into it. You know, and
A revival.
it's like a cycle. And I'm like, well, that kind of makes sense. But you know, I guess in the West, it seems like it's just, you know, people just are apathetic, you know, and it's starting to actually that cycle is actually starting to span out and become more on the side of constant rebellion. It
Right,
seems
right.
to it. Um,
I mean, we are millennials. We, being millennials and being zillennials, I guess, rebellion is a part of our lifeblood. I mean, you can see it in our music, you can see it in our writing. We just, we tend to rebel against the things of our predecessors. And that especially finds itself in the religion of our ancestors. That's why the deconstruction movement has been on an all time high. This is why the Torah observant movement has been on an all time high. It's because we like to rebel against what we call or what we think of as the status quo. And I mean, this is why when you look at these particular things, they begin with the narrative of, well, I was in Christianity and I figured out the things that Christianity doesn't tell you, as if we're hiding these things, because that's the narrative that gets millennials going, that the man is hiding things from you and you have to be the activist. You have to be the Robin Hood to steal from the rich and give to the poor. You have to be the revolutionary to find the things that the evil corporations are trying to keep from you.
right on. Yeah, yeah, I hear you. And it's so exacerbated, you know. It's just
It's
um
annoying, honestly,
it
because
really
it
is.
it drives the people who actually know what they're talking about insane.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, people get tired of repeating themselves every 2 to 3
hmm
years.
And not only that, but then you look at, you know, you see these controversies throughout history pop back up and get squashed. It's like people will start bringing them up, they'll get squashed, people will stop believing them for a while, they'll go dormant, and then they'll be popular. The whole like Jesus myth movement, same thing, you know,
Mhm.
which was popular, you know, about 5 years ago now. You know, it was really kicking off. You know,
Right.
but yeah, it's so interesting. But let's get into why this stuff. is important? Why are councils in themselves important?
Right. So first and foremost, in order to define the reason why councils matter, we have to determine what a council is. A council is a group of church leaders, primarily what we would call the elders or the bishops, gathering together to decide a particular matter, whether it be on in relation to discipline or in relation to doctrine. And these particular things are councils are gathered in order to respond to an objection provided by those either outside the church or within the church, primarily for things within the church. And the reason why it matters is not because that it's making a declaration or establishing orthodoxy, but simply repeating what orthodoxy already says in a language that refutes those who seek to contradict it. It's not creating doctrine, it is clarifying doctrine in a way that it argues against those who seek to contradict what the church has always believed.
Right on. So, that's what an ecumenical council is, folks. And I wanted to reiterate that, it's not that, like you said, they're creating doctrine,
Yeah.
but usually the best doctrines are created from the controversies, right? But they're not created. They're
Right.
just defined. The language is given to the specificity of what's being challenged. And, to me, I think that's why they were necessary because, we get into like the first council that comes up. What is the first council, Jeremiah?
Really, if we look at it from a biblical history perspective and a church history perspective, it isn't by church historians, it isn't technically counted as an ecumenical council, but really it is. That's why many Protestants call it the First Council of Jerusalem, which is referring back to what happens in the 50s, between 50 and 52 AD, where the church gathers together to answer a particular issue. I mean, we see this in Acts chapter 15, where Jewish believers are coming up. Well, first and foremost is Jewish non-believers, and then it's Jewish believers who come to say, well, unless you Gentiles are obeying the law of Moses and being circumcised under the custom of Moses, then you cannot be saved. And so the church gathers together and talks about this issue. We are discussing the issue, and you bring up the evidence of what God has done in history and what God has prophesied in Scripture. Primarily, if we look at Acts 15, Peter and Paul and Silas and Paul and Barnabas are recalling the gospel being preached to the Gentiles and them coming to faith, and they didn't have to be circumcised and they didn't have to obey the law of Moses. Peter gets up and he says, brothers, you know that the first Gentiles who were preached the gospel to were called by my hand and by my word. They were converted by the Holy Spirit. And so why are you laying down a yoke upon the Gentiles that we cannot be able to bear? But we believe that we are saved by grace just like they are. And then the decider of the issue, James, who most people traditionally call the Bishop of Jerusalem at the time, he gets up and he says, everything that Paul, Barnabas, and Peter have said is true, and it is backed up by Scripture. And then he quotes a prophecy of Amos, and then he says, "Therefore, it is my decision that we do not bar Gentiles from the church, but instead give them 4 requirements so that they might be able to commune with their Jewish brothers." And so the church gathers together. They agree. They send out a letter, which is basically the canons of that council, and it says, this is given in unity. This is to represent the entirety of the church, and it seems good to us and the Holy Spirit to lay no greater burden on you than these. If you do these things, you will do well. Goodbye.
Very good, very good. Yeah. and what really blows my mind is when you're getting into the first council. I mean, this kind of like kicks off the whole thing, right? Like this
Right.
whole idea of councils and this and that. And I was wondering, why in the world weren't they covering everything? Like, why didn't they start just, out of the gate? Um, like you said, give us a canon, and was Jesus's deity discussed here? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
was
and
it? Was it? Why not? Why
well,
wasn't it discussed here?
right. The question is, well, the question is, why did it have to? Really, what councils are supposed to do is that they are not supposed to define every single point of theology. There is a difference between an ecumenical council that lays out a creed and then Protestants coming together and laying out something like a confession.
Right,
That's not the same.
right,
And so what the church goes to do in a council, even something as big as an ecumenical council, it's not reinventing the wheel. It's simply addressing a specific topic. And so when we get to the Council of Nicea and we get to the Council of Constantinople, those particular issues will really come to a head when we ask about, when we're looking at the Nicene Creed, we see a lot of stuff about the Son, but we don't see much about the Father and the Spirit.
right. And that's like you said, they face controversies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the big thing. Why wasn't Christ or Jesus's deity brought up then? It's because it was already assumed at this time.
Yep.
It was so close to the original events, right? That they didn't question this stuff at that time.
Right.
They knew. They already knew. Yeah, Jesus is God. And we might I might get some flack from that from our some of our friends, but the truth is it wasn't an issue. It was already
Right.
known to them,
We
the
already
big thing
see
is
this.
Gentile inclusion here. you
Right.
know
Exactly.
so let's get into the controversies that face the early church. I know I saw you had your screen ready to be shared, so I mean, did you
Mhm.
want to go through anything or?
This goes a little bit into some of the stuff in relation to Nicaea, but I can just lay out some of the general controversies that were happening in the early church before we get to the Arian controversy.
Right.
After the close of the New Testament, you basically get a multitude of different controversies. First and foremost, you have the Gnostic controversy, which is basically if you took some of the stuff in relation to the Gentiles and what they believed, and then took it to the extreme. So, in relation to Gnosticism, Jesus was God, but he was not true God. He was basically a lesser being, one of the what they called the eons. And so he was merely another creation who could be called God. And because he is good, he didn't have a physical body. And so when Jesus walked on the earth, he didn't actually have a physical body. He couldn't really die on the cross because there was nothing to pin on there. I mean, I love to use the example of sort of stuff that we have now. If you guys were kids and were like me and my grandparents, at least one place in the house you'd have a story of Jesus walking along the seashore with the disciples or with you, and you could see two sets of footprints. And then you go from the two sets of footprints to the one set of footprints, and the person speaking looks back at Jesus and he says, "Well, why is there one set of footprints?" The response that we have in our Christian tradition is, "Oh, well, those are the times that I actually carried you on the way to heaven." And that's beautiful, and that's beautiful, and that's great stuff. But the Gnostic would say, no, they didn't appear because Jesus didn't have a physical body. They weren't
Right.
real. And so
Right.
the church adamantly argued against that. I mean, we see this in the New
Oh yeah.
Testament where John is adamantly saying the word became flesh and
Yes.
dwelt among
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Paul says that Jesus was man, was son of David according to the flesh. And John says, if you do not confess that Christ has come in the flesh, then you are antichrist.
Right. Right.
Aside from that, we have the Ebionites, which is a repeat of what we had at the Council of Jerusalem. The Torah observers, who basically say, well, Jesus was just a man, and then was basically adopted as the Son of God at his baptism. And the church regaled against that and said, no, if Christ is to be our savior, then he must be truly God, because only God can save us from our sins. And so you have the full recognition that Jesus is God. And so the question comes up, which is very similar to how we think when we read the Bible. Well, if Jesus is God, how does he relate to the Father? And there, in trying to answer that particular question, you have two well, mainly, first and foremost, one particular stream, which is modalism or Sabellianism. A guy named Sabellius basically proposed that the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Spirit, is basically just one God and one person putting on different. The term used in Greek is persona, which basically means mask. So God sometimes acts as a father, acts as a son, and then acts as a Holy Spirit.
Yep. And
And
you know what's funny here, and just as a historical note, if you understood the socio context, the historical context, you would know that this is in relation to the culture and the plays they used to have in those cultures where they would wear different masks and
yep,
stuff like that. So you get that image, and it really drives the point home of what that meant. And this is one of the things I get excited for when you learn in history is you're able to put more of a actual face to the practice when you know the history of it. But go ahead, continue.
exactly. And it is really out of this modalism controversy, the Sabellian controversy, that you get basically two streams of response. One primarily in the East and the other primarily in the West. Let's start with the West first. You get scholars like Tertullian. And it's here where, in Tertullian's writings, where we get the first extant record or apologetic record of the term Trinity. And he's arguing against a modalist named Praxius. And so he defines the Trinity as one God, one essence, and three persons: the Father, Son, and Spirit. He defines the he basically responds to Sabellianism by clarifying his language. And on the other side, you have the East, primarily primarily defined and responded to by a man named Origen of Alexandria. Now, Origen is very, very important here because he is not only very influential, he's a child prodigy, he's a genius, but he's also very problematic because we could trace the Arian controversies from his inconsistencies in defining the doctrine of the Trinity. Let's see. I believe Philip Schaff has some laying out of this particular thing. Give me 1 second to see if I can find it here.
No, and that's fine. Yeah, take your time, buddy.
Here it is.
This is like I said, this is nerd talk tonight. This is to answer questions about these things that people will spew out without even really knowing the history and stuff behind it. I want to be for us to answer those questions, and so when I bring it back just a little bit before we even get to these controversies, these huge controversies, the ones that inspire uh Nicea and so forth. I wanted to also go back to like the scripture where Jesus says, beware of false teachers, right?
Mhm.
Jesus tells them, beware of false teachers. So this happens right away. This happens like right within the lifetime of the apostles. You have a belief system that breaks out in the Mediterranean area, right?
Yeah,
In the Middle East here. And it spreads really
everywhere.
rapidly everywhere. And you're going to have people that are questioning things. You're going to have people that are like, okay, but then you're going to have people that are saying, hey, this is actually getting kind of popular. Let me see if I can't throw my lot in here and get famous, right? So you're going to have your false teachers starting to come around, like the super apostles. Now, we don't know exactly everything they taught, but they were super apostles and they did teach another gospel, right?
Exactly.
And they called themselves super apostles because they were better than the apostles because they went to rhetoric school, right? That was a real thing. Yeah, you would learn rhetoric. You would learn how to publicly speak. That was a real big a deal for people in that time frame.
I still wish that people still took lessons in public speaking. That would help in rhetoric and argumentation today, but that's besides the point.
You're not going to get that in the way social media is these days, and anybody can jump on. But it's kind of like the whole idea at one time, freedom of religion's a double-edged sword too. On the one hand, it's necessary for freedom, right? For a free country, for a free society. But on the other side, now anybody in their backyard can just start, planting churches and having no idea what they're talking about, which is kind of why we're here today, because it's gotten out of control. We don't like take our history into consideration and stuff like that. But yes, they started dealing with the stuff right away. Controversies right away. Super apostles, Docetans, which like Jeremiah alluded to, which literally means illusion. They thought Jesus was an illusion of some sort or some sort of spirit being. He wasn't in the flesh. So you get these controversies early on. And as further you get from the original disciples, right? The further you get away from them, the more these things grow to include things like the deity of Christ, stuff that wasn't taken that wasn't questioned in those early years. Like the biggest one was yes. So they were able to hit a lot of these guys right off the bat, right? But as further down the line you get, now the controversies are beginning to happen within the church because it is a melting pot, and you're having these people that once believed in pagan gods, they're being included, and they're kind of scared. And Tertullian points this out, and against Praxis, is that, hey, look, the most of the laity doesn't understand the Trinity.
What the church has believed.
They don't understand it, and he uses the term simple. He says to the simple, but he's really meaning the laity. He's saying like these guys are scared because they don't want to jump from the pagan boat into another polytheistic type of religion.
Right.
So he's like, we have to define our terms a little bit better. But the thing is that they were always dealing with controversies from the false teachers were going to come. The wolves are gonna gather, because truth and the light has come in this unique way. And now it's exploding. And now the disciples are, they're getting martyred. They're getting killed, So the one thing I do want to point out is you will see a consistent theology. And, Jeremiah, you could correct me if I'm wrong here, but I see the impact of John the disciple all throughout the early church fathers. Like I think he's probably, because maybe he lived longer and people had more of a recollection, right? I think his theology I see most present in even Paul, which is crazy. I know a lot of people are like, well, no way, man. Paul was an apostle too. They just believed similar things. Well, yeah. Well, I see what we see as far as what we call John's theology throughout the very early church. I think it's like the most prominent. And matter of fact, the Gospel of John is actually quoted by most of the fathers. It's something like 96% of the Gospel of John was quoted by the early church fathers. We know Clement of Rome, who was an early church father. Clement of Rome was probably Paul and Peter's protege, right? But then you go to the ones you have a lot of letters from, like Ignatius, Polycarp, Papias, and then another generation later, Irenaeus, right?
Hmm.
You have those three. Now, I know Peter installs Ignatius in Antioch.
Right.
However, Ignatius is one of John's disciples. Polycarp is one of John's disciples. Papias is one of John's disciples. And
Yeah.
we have a lot of stuff from them that has survived, except for Polycarp. He's got one letter that survived, right?
Right.
So yeah, so that's why you see John, I think, more than the rest at first here.
Right.
So
I mean, they
go ahead.
have the same theology, but John has his the language that he uses
Oh
is
yeah.
very unique. It's different from the synoptics because he has a particular emphasis. Now that he's older and most of the apostles are doing other things, he is able to give more information, especially in his gospel, that that the apostles have either already said or the things that they have not said. I mean, that's why the Gospel of John actually makes references to the other Gospels or to information that is found in the other Gospels, because he affirms that these other books were written either just slightly earlier or earlier enough for his audience to actually get what he's referencing.
Yep. And don't think he was alone on this either.
Yeah, he's not.
It's most likely that he was getting help from, well, at least our moratorium fragment and other historians talk about John being uh asked to do this by
The
people like
elders.
Andrew too, the apostle, Peter's brother, Thomas, at the request of these guys. So they were probably still alive around this time. So yeah, it's not like they all died at once, but John was brilliant, and a lot of people are like, well, fishermen and Galileans, they couldn't read back then, right? The literacy was so bad, and it's like, you don't think Jesus knew who he was picking to do this stuff?
I
And
mean,
do
like,
you think that
literally,
John stayed that way? I mean, he's in Ephesus. We see him traveling to the Asia and affecting all these churches there. The man wasn't dumb. His
no.
dad owned a fishing business. Um, he
How are you going to
probably
do commerce?
he probably furthered his education with Jesus, and so on. So I mean, there's a lot to that we don't take into consideration because we want to put these historical norms and apply them to each and every person, and that's just not the case. There are people that lived to be 85 back then, and John was one of them.
Right.
Not all of them did. Yeah, we understand the majority is that way. However, John did live that long. He did live into his old age. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the extensive basic biography of him throughout these early church fathers, that talk
Right,
about him,
exactly.
right? So, we do have evidence, and a lot of people will let's deal with what the consensus is versus what the actual evidence is that we have from history, that history actually presents to us. But
Right.
anyways, I know I've went on for a while now, but that's just some background. I nerded out there for a little bit.
Yeah.
But what am I wrong? Is John's theology so prevalent through
Yes.
all that? That whole idea, Jesus is God, all those early notions that you get from the Gospel of John, that you get from that early theology of Paul, it all is so similar.
Yes. Exactly. I mean, like, the only thing you have to do is just read the church fathers. For example, Ignatius, when he writes to the Ephesians, he writes, there is one physician of flesh and of spirit, born and unborn, God come in the flesh, true life in death, both from Mary and from God, first subject to suffering and then beyond suffering, Jesus Christ our Lord. He died in the 2nd century, near the close of the New Testament canon. And Ignatius believed that Jesus was truly God who came in the flesh. I mean, just looking along with Clement of Rome and Melito of Sardis in his Easter sermon literally says God was murdered.
Right.
So it affirms not only the deity of Christ, but his physical death on the cross.
Yeah.
I mean, I could I could spend an entire stream just
Yeah.
reading Melito of Sardis's Easter sermon, and it
Well,
could bring the entire church into worship.
and we see what was it? Ignatius talking about the blood of our God.
The
Um,
blood of God.
yeah. I mean, that's in his opening letter to the Ephesians, right there. So
And it's
it's
a
just
direct reference to what Paul says to the church at Ephesus in Acts chapter 20, where he says, I commend you to God, to the church of Jesus Christ, whom God had, well, the church of God, whom he purchased with his own blood.
right. And it's so cool that we can actually make these links, right? And
Yeah.
what do we do? Why can we make those links? It's because we're actually studying what they wrote. You know how many people I argue with that tell me what a church father believed, and then when I'm like, have you ever read the whole thing? And they're like, no. And
No.
it's not an admission that they're stupid or anything. They're quoting something they said, but it's not in light of the entirety
What they
of what
actually
they're
said.
talking about, what their apology is. And you see these apologies. Why are these apologies going out? Most of the time, it's in reference to when they get Jesus wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have these apologies. People were getting Jesus wrong.
Right.
And I know you were still going with whatever you pulled up, so I'm gonna
Yeah,
I'm gonna
I
turn it
mean,
back to you here
right.
because you're the guest of honor here.
This really goes back to what we were talking about earlier with trying to clarify language when people get Jesus wrong, and of course we had Tertullian, who actually clarifies his language to the language that we often use, the difference between being and person. But on the other side, in the East, you had a I guess another way of defining it, which is distinguishing, separating, I guess, too far between the Father and the Son, and from that source, you get someone like Origen, who argued against the Sabellians. Church historian Philip Schaff puts it this way. I'm sharing my screen. If you could put this up. Um, let's see. Yeah, here's what he says. The roots of the Aryan controversy are to be found partly in the contradictory elements of the Christology of Origen of Alexandria, which reflect the crude condition of the Christian mind of the 3rd century, partly in the antagonism between the Alexandrian and Antiochian theology, which is basically just trying to describe that in the early church, particularly in the East, you had two schools: Alexandria, which basically focused primarily on the deity of Christ and the unity of the Father, Son, and Spirit, and the unity of the divine nature, and the Antiochian school, which primarily focused on the humanity of Christ and things of that nature, and the threeness of the doctrine of the Trinity. So Origen, on the one hand, attributed to Christ eternity and other divine attributes, which logically led to the orthodox identity of substance, so that he was vindicated even by Athanasius and the two Cappadocian Gregories and Basil the Great, the Cappadocian fathers. And so that's good. But on the other hand, in his zeal for the personal distinctions in the Godhead, particularly against Sabellianism, he taught with equal clearness a separateness of the essence between the Father and the Son, and that the Son was subordinate to the Father, a second or secondary God beneath the Father, and thus furnished a starting point for the Arian heresy. And so, in his enunciation of a good doctrine, the eternal generation of the Son, he said that the Father communicated a secondary substance, a divine substance, yes, but it's less than what God had originally wanted, or it's less than who God truly was. And so, this idea, in the hands of a less devout and profound Arius and Origenist, who was taught by a man named Lucian, uh, basically just added rigid logic and admitted there was no intermediate being between God and the creature. And so he basically said, there was a time when the Son was not there. I mean, the Son is not even an intermediate creature or intermediate being between God and the creature. He just is a creature. And so it is that trail of a high Origenist Christology down to what we now know as an Arian Christology, and that starts the entirety of the Arian controversy. Well, like I said, it goes down to Lucian of Antioch, who
Right,
actually
right.
melded Origen's views with another heretic, Paul of Samosata, on the Trinity, and he was excommunicated, but after rose into great consideration because of his martyrdom.
What website do you have for that? Is that a source for you, or
Yeah, Philip Schaff and his
Philip
book
Schaff?
History of
Okay.
the yeah, Philip Schaff is a really prominent and popular historian. His book series History of the Christian Church are some
Mhm.
of the best ones that you can give, and also his translations of the early church fathers' writings are some of the ones that you definitely need to get. His Apostolic Fathers, his Ante-Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers, wonderful stuff. Highly recommend it.
Yeah. So like we're coming up on 50 minutes here, and I just feel so disappointed because uh we could spend another I could probably argue with you a little bit about the whole idea of origin and stuff like that. We could probably get into
Right.
that and just go down that route because I've always seen origin as like not defining himself
Mm-hmm.
in certain areas. Like I would probably come back and say, well, I don't think it was as clear as what he's making it out to be,
Right. Right. And
because
really,
for me, I think that well, I agree. Lucian of Antioch is the one that pretty much put the fork in it, right?
yep.
However, I think that we had a sect break off, and I think there's some trace elements of this as it goes on because you
Mm-hmm.
start seeing like subordinationism, uh, like in a partial sense, and stuff like that when that with origin, you start
Right.
seeing the trace elements of uh the subordinationism really start to kick off. And I
Right.
think it was even called extreme originism or radical originists,
Yeah.
people that really were radical when it came to origin.
Yeah.
And then,
I point this out
yeah.
in my heresy series on TikTok.
Oh, nice, nice. I haven't probably seen all of those. I still seen a couple, but yeah.
I'm
So
still waiting for the playlist feature to come out for me because I need to get that organized so people can see the rest of it.
yeah, they do need to put that out. But yeah, so like even Ryan Reeves, one of the people I've listened to a lot on church history as well.
Love the
He's really
man.
good. He's really good. And it's like he can break it down so simply. Where I can spend an hour and a half listening to a detailed lecture, you know, and they're like, well, that was just we only got through like part of Acts, and that's just a survey. And you're like, dude, that was an hour and a half that was really detailed on like the first 5 chapters of Acts. Are you kidding me?
Why did you do this to me?
And I was like, really? I was like, man, no, it's not that. I got excited because I was like, dude, there's like a whole bunch of lectures in the series, and now I'm gonna be able to like really get even more of a detailed response here. Where my first Christianity 1 and 2, you had an hour, and I'm already, the first hour and a half, or the first lecture, or the first like part of class, we pretty much got through all the early church fathers. It was only brief. It was really a survey, right?
Yeah.
But when you're going through Acts 1 through 5, where your first lecture, and that's your hour and a half basically, and it's like that's all you got covered, that's how you know it's going to be good.
Uh-huh.
Especially if you're a nerd like me, man. So
You're going
anyway,
to have fun. And
yeah,
and yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you about, I mean, Origin is really a controversial character,
yes,
not only just in modern church history when we consider him, but also in his own time. He was loved by many, he was also hated by many, and especially now in his post-mortem excommunication or post-mortem anathematization. There's not a lot of information that we have on the man, particularly from his own writings, and
right.
so there's a lot that we can say about him and whether or not he held these particular beliefs or not. And so there's a lot that we could talk about with this. I'd
Yeah.
love to.
He
And
he
because
never was a bishop, and that's
no, he
because
wasn't.
he was staying with a woman because she had a copy of the Old Testament,
Mhm.
and he
He took
he took his
the
manhood off.
right, and it was really because of his interpretation of, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off, and so he took that literally, and then
Oh,
he became a eunuch. And that was the
yeah.
last time Origen took up a literal interpretation, and therefore he embraced allegory.
There you
I'm
go.
not saying that that's exactly what happened, but I could see that
I
happening.
can see it too, man. That's a good one. I haven't heard it like that. Oh, that's too good.
Oh my goodness. We've
Yeah,
spent
that's
almost an
definitely.
hour and we haven't even gotten to Nicaea yet.
I
We've
know.
just gotten to Arius. So
All right.
let's see. On the road to Arius.
Yep.
So we've seen some of the stuff with what Arius actually believes. And so what is the start of the Arian controversy? Basically, Schaff puts it this way, and I talk about it a little bit. It starts primarily with Alexander, the Bishop of Alexandria. He is actually an Origenist, but he actually perfects it in an orthodox way. He says, Schaff says that he made an earnest of the Origenic doctrine of the generation of the Son, which is taught by Athanasius in the Nicene Creed.
Now,
But he taught it in a
okay,
different sense.
who is Athanasius? There you go. We're
Ah,
gonna
ha,
have to
ha.
cover this little guy that comes up. He's only about 4'11". He's from Africa.
Mhm.
He's just this little guy that's
Short
able to
black guy.
hide very well. Thus is why probably he lived with his five exiles,
Mhm.
4 exiles or whatever. Yeah, good.
One of the best guys, to be honest with you, because Athanasius is basically Alexander's the bishop's deacon, one of his deacons, and he's basically his right hand man in the controversy, and a staunch Nicene believer, as we will see. And so Alexander, following, basically laying the groundwork for Athanasius, he notes that the generation of the Son is the generation of is from the same substance as the Father, and not a different substance. And from it, he deduced the term homoousios, or consubstantiality of the Son from the Father. And so another deacon, another presbyter, is Arius of Alexandria. And so he hears what his bishop is saying, and he says, "Wait a minute, that's modalism." And so he actually he actually accuses Alexander of modalism. And so, of course, I mean, a controversy starts. Um, uh, and basically, he accuses him of Sabellianism, and he taught that Christ, while Christ was the creator of the world, was himself a creature of God and therefore not truly divine. So basically, create two circles. You have the creature here and you have the creator here, and these things don't mix. So the question is, where are you going to put Christ? Alexander of Alexandria, because the scriptures describe Jesus as true God. He says, "I am the Father are one." He is the one by whom all things were made. He is Yahweh in the flesh. And so he says, "Unless you believe that I am, you will die in your sins." And so Alexander places him in the side of the Creator. But Arius, he places him, he says that Jesus is great. He can be called God in a sense. But because he is of a different substance from the Father, he is placed in the creator circle. And so that causes a giant controversy about how we define who Jesus is. Is he God or is he not? And so, as Schaff notes, the contest between these two views broke out in about the year 318 or 320. And Arius and his followers, for their denial of the true deity of Christ, were deposed and excommunicated by a council of 100 Egyptian and Libyan bishops at Alexandria in 321 AD. And so we would think, well, we have a local council, and the person who is spouting heresy has been excommunicated and condemned. Things should be right as rain now, right? No, I think
it's too big of a controversy at this point. And
right.
that's the thing. I mean, we've kind of given you the roots of the controversy. right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like I said, it does just so happens that Arius and Lucian are, buds here too. I think
Right.
he was Arius was a late disciple of it. There's also a third view that is represented in Nicaea as well.
Mm-hmm.
But let's look. Why is this controversy now getting so big?
Yeah, I mean, the controversy gets really, really big, primarily because, I mean, we pretty much, we pretty much know this now, especially when dealing with just difficult people. Whenever you try to squash a heresy locally and send them out of the church, they don't stop talking. They don't stop repeating their heresy. They continue to spread it. And so
Oh, so Christians didn't kill heretics right away? The early
no, of
early
course not.
Christians? Oh,
No.
wow, huh? So
I
much for
mean
what Dan Brown talked about, and
I
some
mean
other
exactly
folks I've
right.
heard, right?
Right. I mean,
And
like, remember what's going on. This
so Christianity
controversy break.
wasn't spread with the sword.
No, for the past 300 years or so, the church has been under persecution. Like for example, the modalist controversy, the Sabellian controversy, the Eusebians, all of these before Arius, these were all under the context of Roman and Jewish persecution. And as we will see later on at the Council of Nicaea, they will still be wearing the scars of persecution as time goes on, because the Edict of Milan is in 313,
Right,
and this is when persecution ceases.
right.
So it is in the
L-
same way
let's
that,
let's 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 give a little bit of background, Jeremiah, just
yeah,
for those that don't know. What is the Milan Edict? What
yeah.
happened? How did that occur?
Basically, well, here, let me put this in a way that I can explain it without being too long-winded here. We'll start, because I actually wrote an article about this in college, what really happened at the Council of Nicaea. And so let's talk about the Edict of Milan and his encounters with Christianity. So let's talk about Emperor Constantine. Constantine was the son of a tolerant Emperor Constantius. When his father died, he was crowned Caesar of the city of York. His pivotal movement happened when he battled the anti-Christian leader Maxentius. So though Constantine was a sun worshiper at the time, he was tolerant of Christians. His turning point really was occurred when he was at war with Maxentius over the control of Italy and northwest Africa. In the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, Constantine had a dream in which he saw the letters Chi and Rho, the first two Greek letters for Christ, appearing in the shape of a cross. And within this dream, he also heard the words, "By this sign, conquer." Constantine thought that this dream was an amazing omen, and in response, he ordered all of his troops to paint that sign on their shields. After praying to the Christian God, he fought Maxentius once more and won. So Constantine took this as a sign that God, the true God, was for him. And so he converted and resolved to be a great champion and protector of Christians. Do we know whether or not this dream actually occurred? Not for certain. But we know that this influenced Constantine in such a way that he started to support Christianity. And it's even from that day on, Christians used the Chi-Rho as a sign of Christianity. And so this leads us to Constantine's life as an emperor. When he was an emperor, he has been placed under scrutiny by modern historians today, of course. In his time, he was praised highly because of his generosity, his sense of justice, and to an extent, his sexual purity. His purity was truly heralded by all of the contemporary Christian biographers because that virtue was rare for Roman rulers. And his conversion seemed to be the greatest conversion in history, aside from the Apostle Paul and the Christian faith. His reign transformed the Roman Empire's view of Christianity with what we know as his Edict of Milan and his calling of the Council of Nicaea. So the Edict of Milan is basically a call or an end of Roman persecution, because for the past 300 years or so, the church was persecuted by Roman and Jewish leaders. But in the Edict of Milan, it basically gave an order of tolerance for Christians. They weren't basically crucified on sight or killed on sight.
Right. So yeah, that's what one of the things you'll read if you read any of the martyrdoms is when the Romans respond, they respond with their Jewish counterparts at times, and they make the Christian writer, whoever's recording the martyrdom, will show you what the Jews had to say versus what the Romans had to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Romans would call the Christians atheists, and the Jews would often tell them that they're telling us to stop sacrificing, and this and that, and you'll be able to differentiate that when you're reading the accounts, so the Roman governor would say, well, he's admitted to being a Christian, you all have heard this, and that was it.
Kill him.
All you had to do was confess to being a Christian, and that was it. That was the extent. That was your death sentence right there,
Yeah.
So you'll get that as you read some of their martyrdoms and stuff like that. And like Ignatius, most of his letters that we have was written because he was going to be martyred in the Colosseum. So there's a lot of history here that we haven't even been able to cover in this hour.
Yeah.
However, we get to this edict, and Constantine does not declare Christianity the official religion of Rome.
No,
he doesn't. He just legalizes it. He stops the persecutions.
That doesn't happen until 381 with Emperor Theodosius, and this is after the Council of Nicea. This is after the Council of Constantinople. This is after so much has happened in relation to not only politics but also the history of the church and hashing out things like the spirit fighters and things of that nature. Constantine did not, I repeat, did not make Christianity the official religion. Right. The only thing he did was legalize it and support it as a Christian.
So why was Constantine involved? And this is one we have to answer before we go, because we are after an hour here too.
Right, so, right. We have to move quickly here.
Why was Constantine involved with Nicea in the first place? Why was he getting the council together? Why did he want to see this happen? Was he just sick of the controversy, or was this have something bigger going on? What did he have to gain by this doctrine?
Well, really, he was from all accounts of what we know that he was a Christian, and so he wanted Christian unity, and so when he saw pastors arguing with one another, he thought, this is not going to be good for the church, and this is not going to be good for my country, because if I'm going to be part of a religion that's going to be tearing itself apart, that's not going to help politics either. That's not going to help the view of the empire either. And so bishops, from what we seem to say, from what we think, bishops actually came to Constantine and said, hey, maybe if you could help us gather believers together, we could hash out this issue. And so he said, sure. We'll gather up our bishops, invite the bishops together, and we can have this council. And he chose a city called Nicea. Let's see. Basically, here's how I describe it. He had given the church peace, and the division in the faith would not only cause theological trouble but political chaos. And so as a result, he summoned the bishops for the first ecumenical council of bishops from all over the East and West to settle the issue. And so we come to Nicea. The council met at Nicea in northwest Asia Minor in 325 AD. And though Constantine invited over 1,800 bishops from across the empire, only 300 bishops attended the council, with most coming from the east.
And you got to also remember, hold on, you remember now, these guys were just persecuted.
Right,
They're
exactly.
just coming out. So there's a lot of them that didn't. And it's so funny here. I just want to point this out before we move on, is that, another reason that this was really huge is because, and why Constantine actually did say, I am going to get involved a little bit here, because he was receiving requests to be involved. Okay. Right. But also because this controversy had gotten really, 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 really big, right? This is probably one of the this is probably the biggest controversy. Matter of fact, Eusebius of Caesarea, who records church history, he actually was against the council itself. He thought it was going to divide the church.
Yeah.
Further, he said, once a creed is made, it's going to divide the church. And he was actually at the council, by the way.
He was.
Yep, and he was in there as well. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this situation had gotten so far that even people who are selling fish and selling bread, the guy selling fish would hold one position and the guy buying the fish would have a different position, and they would argue so much that riots would start.
Right? Yeah.
And I mean, like, dealing with church controversy has never been clean and pristine. It has always been messy, and even more messy when you have cultural behaviors adding to it. That's why we have riots every time there's a controversy. Right. So this leads to the council in order to establish peace. So let's talk in brief about the council.
Right.
Among the individuals who were at the council were Alexander, Arius, and one of Alexander's deacons named Athanasius. Here we know. And once everyone gathered and took their places, the council could triumphantly begin. So in order to talk about the council's proceedings, one must emphasize that Constantine didn't have any theological part in the council at all. Constantine only presided as the moderator. He presided over the council to keep order, but did not force a Trinitarian view on the church council. Constantine, in many ways, he was many things, but a theologian he was not. And so the early church already believed that Jesus was divine. And so within the council, there were three main groups that attended and debated. The first were the Arians, who believed that Jesus was of a different substance from the Father. They used the term heterousios, different substance. The second was what we call the Orthodox group, led by Alexander. They believed that Jesus was fully God and of the same substance as the Father, homoousios, same substance. And the last group is popularly called the Eusebian group, after the historian Eusebius of Caesarea. Now, Eusebius, he did not like the council, even though he agreed of the deity of Christ. The thing that he did not like was the term homoousios. And the main reason why was because Sabellius and other Sabellians tried to use that language in order to promote Sabellianism or modalism. And so he said, well, if you're going to use that language, you're going to cause people to misunderstand what you mean.
Yeah. And that was their big concern there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so really the issue was hotly debated, or well, to an extent. It's within this particular issue where we get the story of Saint Nicholas from. One of the popular stories of Saint Nicholas, where an Arian is laying out his position, and Nicholas gets so upset that he walks up and slaps an Arian, and he gets into a lot of big trouble for that. We love to celebrate it, but he got into a good amount of trouble.
Yeah.
And so at the
yeah, and you have to understand the passion is so intense because you have these guys coming back from persecution, just settling back into some of their ancestral homes, getting back to their daily routines, that happened probably since before they were born. It was happening. We're talking about 300 and almost, what is it? 200 and some years, 300 years of persecution, like, hey, I'm a Christian, you're gone. Right. So they're coming back after all this persecution. And if you ever want to know the type of persecution they went through, all you have to do is read.
Yep.
Okay. People were boiled alive, roasted in big bird cages and tarred and feathered. So, I mean, mutilated, all sorts of stuff. Origen talks about it at one point about the screams that he heard that affected him when he was in prison, and the screams outside and stuff like that of a certain female that was mutilated. He never recovered, I think, mentally from that either. Supposedly. So
here's basically what Here's basically what Schaff puts. If you can share my screen,
Oh yeah.
this is how Schaff puts it. He says, among the fathers of the council, besides a great number of obscure mediocrities, there were several distinguished and venerable men. Eusebius of Caesarea was among the most eminent for learning. The young archdeacon Athanasius, who was accompanied by Alexander for zeal, intellect, and eloquence. Some, as confessors, still bore in their body the marks of Christ from the times of persecution. Paphnutius of the Upper Thebaid, Potamon of Heraclea, whose right eye had been plucked out, Paul of Neo Caesarea, who had been tortured with a red hot iron under Licinius and crippled in both of his hands. Others were distinguished for extraordinary ascetic holiness and even for miraculous works, like Jacob of Nispus, who has spent years as a hermit and lived like a wild beast on roots and leaves, and other people like that. There's even a
Yeah.
story at the Council of Nicaea, written by or told by Eusebius, where Constantine, before the council starts, he goes up to a man who has been blinded and blesses him with a kiss on the forehead. Just imagine giving your life for the faith and refusing to deny Christ by the Roman emperor, and I mean, in front of the Roman government, and as a result, your eyes get plucked out, and
Right.
still live in the exact same time where, in one sense, in one part of your life, your eyes get plucked out for the cause of your faith. And then at the same time, the emperor comes and blesses you as a Christian for your faith.
Right. And then also remember that when he says confessors here, confessors were a group of individuals that endured persecution.
Yep.
There are two groups basically. Okay. Uh, Ones that stayed and endured the persecution, and ones that fled and hid.
Mhm.
Those confessors would hear their confession of why they fled instead of endured, and would basically make a decision. Yeah, you did it for the right reasons,
Mhm.
and they would let you back in, the fold. You
Yep.
know, so yeah, so it was a very real thing, and they took seriously those that would endure persecution versus those that would not. So
Right.
yeah, it was a different culture, different thing. It's not as accepting as we are sometimes, but there was a lot going on there that we, unless we're going through that type of persecution, we're never going to be able to understand it. But
Right.
back to it. Go ahead, Jeremiah. I didn't want to
So
keep interrupting here.
no, you're exactly right. And so as these people bore the scars of persecution and were willing to die with their faith, it's highly unlikely that they would actually concede their beliefs without putting their opponents to debate. You can stop sharing my screen. I think I'm done with
Okay.
that. Um, but yeah, this is basically how the council goes. Arius tried to reinterpret the Bible to fit his position. Athanasius then proposed, along with scriptural arguments, this following question: how many fathers can you cite for your phrases and for your statements? And so Athanasius argued not only from the scriptures, which he states as primary, but also from what the church has always confessed. He's asking them, well, if this is what the church already believed and always believed, cite people for your sources, and he couldn't do it. And so
Right.
when the challenge was given, Arius provided little evidence. This failure caused the council to conclude that the Arian position had to be wrong because the interpretations of scripture were new and it was not taught in early church history. And so as a response, um, the it's funny basically how church councils and how most councils went at the time. In order to get a vote from people, it was audible. And the reason why we would say that these things are unanimous was because a shout of affirmation was basically a shout for yes, that this statement is true. And so, long story short, the council was affirmed by literally 288 people. Out of the 300 that got there, it was 200, well, actually, no, 298 versus 2. So imagine a long shout of over 300 people affirming the deity of Christ and affirming
Yep.
against Arianism. That is
Right.
amazing.
Yeah, it was so united on that front. Now, this is it like Jeremiah pointed out. This wasn't just an easy. Yeah, we're gonna come here. We already believe it. They already did believe it.
Mm-hmm.
When these confessors came back, that's why they brought the Arians up in the first place. They already believed in the deity of Christ. Most of these uh uh bishops believed. However, what the thing is, they gave Arius a fair hearing.
Yep.
And Arius is presented his entire case. Okay. And whoever was with him, they brought their case. And, a lot of things were said. Even Athanasius, one of his quotes in the councils, if God is a creature, he cannot save, because only God can forgive sin. Only God can save. And that
Amen.
was his main point, so there's a lot of stuff that went on there. So they gave Arius that fair hearing, and I think the better side won out.
Yeah, yeah. They
I mean,
did. It was 298 bishops signed the new creed that came out. Only 2 bishops abstained.
right. So guys, that's why Nicaea happened. We are coming up on 1 hour and 20 minutes, and we just got to Nicaea. We didn't even go into the depths of Nicaea.
Yeah.
We could have probably spent a lot more time just on Nicaea by itself.
Yeah.
Now, before we close, I want to give us just a little bit of context of the aftermath of Nicaea, right?
Right.
Was Arianism squashed, Jeremiah? Was
You think?
Trinitarians? Yeah, right. Did Trinitarians then spread by the sword Trinitarianism?
No, in fact, to be honest with you, it's the exact opposite. After Nicaea, you get what is called the Aryan Resurgence. So basically, after or near Constantine's death, Eusebius and Caesarea were basically Eusebius of Caesarea and Arius came out of exile and were invited back into the empire by Constantine because he wanted more unity, because he didn't like that we had to banish someone.
Yeah.
Those
But
who didn't believe.
who gave him that idea? We have another Eusebius, right, of
Yeah,
Nicodemia,
Eusebius
right?
of Nicomedia, an
Yeah,
Arian.
an
And
Arian,
yeah,
and even Constantine was baptized Arian before he died,
yep,
right?
exactly. And
Yeah,
it's funny because the question is whether or not Constantine believed that he was an actual Arian,
yeah.
because of the there was a creed that Constantine required Arius to write, and he intentionally made it similar to the Nicene Creed, but he didn't use the term homoousios. And so, because of course Constantine is not a theologian, he didn't pick that up, and therefore he was allowed back in.
yeah.
And so it was after Constantine's death that we have his children who
Yeah.
are influenced by the Arians to start cracking down on the Nicaeans.
Niceans, yeah. And the thing is that the persecution kind of switches to going after Trinitarians. So the whole idea of Trinitarians spreading the belief, and that's when it became official and good to go. That's just not the case.
Not at
The
all.
Arians, like Eusebius of Nicodemia was slick. He was
Mhm.
smart, but he wasn't as short, for one, as Athanasius, or as smart as Athanasius. Because once these Aryan resurgence happened, they call it the time when it was Athanasius against the world. And this is where I think of my short little Mighty Mouse here. That was just getting exiled and then like hiding from people that were trying to kill him in a boat. And he's covered and the people are literally, he's so little that he hides in this little boat off the Nile, right? And gets to the other side with these guards just basically walking right over him,
Mhm.
basically like pushing down on the blankets, and they don't hit him because he's so small.
He's
They're
so
like, oh yeah, you
small.
got buckets of apples or whatever, you're
Mhm.
good. And he gets away. Poor Athanasius, he went through exile after exile after exile after exile. The Trinity doctrine didn't take on, and we haven't even got to the Chaldeans yet.
Yeah. Not,
You
not
know,
haven't even
we
gotten to
haven't
there
even gotten there. But you know, he gets exiled throughout his life, like 4
yet.
different times, 5 different times, something like
Five.
that. Yeah,
Five.
and uh, all because he held to this doctrine that Jesus was God.
Yeah. I mean, he stood his ground, and really it the phrase is true, Athanasius against the world, because there were people who really were open to compromise. Even Rome was open to compromise. And so even Jerome, reflecting on this particular event, writes that at that time Usia was abolished, and the church awoke, surprised to find itself Arian.
Yeah,
And it's so amazing how one man and his friends stood against um, everything that was thrown at it to defend the Orthodox faith, and through their basically steadfast faithfulness to the scriptures, Valens, the emperor at the time, ended up dying. Arianism basically splintered apart because, of course, the truth cannot. I mean, a house divided against itself cannot stand, and truth doesn't really. I mean, falsehood doesn't really stand good for government, and so
mhm,
the Aryan government fractured,
yeah,
and then the church was able to gather together in Constantinople and reaffirm the Nicene Creed, and of course tackle the Arians for the Holy Spirit, the Pneumatomachian or the
yeah.
Macedonians, at the exact same time. And
And
so
at
not
this
only did
point, you'll
they
start seeing, just real quick. At
go
this
ahead.
point, you'll start seeing the whole Aryan movement moving north.
Hmm. They moved up to the Germanic
Germanic
regions.
tribes. Yep.
Mhm.
But
And
anyways,
the only time we see them now is in the Jehovah's Witnesses and people like that.
mhm.
So Arianism basically died off for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was. There's always pockets of it,
Yeah.
and you can see it throughout. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it got real small, but there was that branch, that section of the north that held to it, and it was
Mm.
probably just because of their disdain to the Rome.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
really didn't like Rome at all. I mean, the Goths had,
Mm.
and the Gauls and everybody else in Northern Europe just you know
Which is funny
sacked
because
Rome.
in
Just didn't
relation to
like them.
Rome, the Bishop of Rome didn't even go to the Council of Nicaea. He sent two legates,
Yeah.
two representatives, two deacons, and
Yep.
so yeah.
But yeah, guys. So I mean, that's pretty much your answer. This has been a long-winded answer. We've tried to cover things. We tried to even some of the terms me and Jeremiah speak Christianese in. I tried to get us to break it down, like what is an
Yeah.
ecumenical council, what let's define what these terms are and stuff like that, so we hope you can latch onto that, understand what the Council of Nicaea was for. Jeremiah, this has been really, really fun, buddy. Why don't you give us a shameless plug again, tell people where they can find you
Yeah.
and what you're involved with, promote your podcast, everything you can.
Yeah, well, of course, follow me on TikTok, the Black Doctor 21. Also, just follow me on here, YouTube, the Black Doctor. This is where I post, of course, the sermons from my church and also my own sermons and stuff like that. Follow me on YouTube, follow me on TikTok, follow me on Instagram. Also, go to the Wheat and Tares, WheatAndTares YouTube channel. This is where we host the Men of the Way podcast. We, of course, as I said before, we stream every Saturday at 7 o'clock. Please come in and support us. We have lots of great merch. We have some great stuff, great discussions, and just come fellowship with us. Have fun with us as we study God's word and learn to be followers of Christ and true men of the way.
Right on. Thank you, Jeremiah. Again, folks, stay tuned. The next battle we got going on is going to be about the intelligent design. We got Travis Worth in concert with our one of our new friends. He's from the Tang group, and I think he's I got the the free thought prophet. That's what the thing is. Sorry, buddy. Sorry, I mispronounced that. But yeah, we'll be in conversation with them on the 26th of March, next Saturday. So we hope to see you guys then. Again, thank you for being here. And there you have it. That's the answer to your question about Nicea. It's not as bad as you think, guys. Anyways, this is David Russell, and this is PRA, and we are out of here.